We've had some very insightful presentations during this round, and now it will be our Q&A time. So if you have any questions for our presenters, you can either type them in the chat or just shout it out, and we can discuss some of these subjects further.
So I kind of had a question. Oh, my name's Jaylee. I'm with the Peace Center as well. I kind of had a question for both Dave and Sophia. Kind of like about how we would kind of go about doing training so police officers kind of go about things in that unbounded way. Because I think it was interesting how you brought up that like with the bounded law, they can become desensitized to certain things. And it made me think about how when Dave was talking about that, like police officers like are supposed to be like warriors of the community, and like in being a warrior, it comes with battling like violent conflict. So I wanted to know like your thoughts on that, both of you.
Okay. Yeah, so one quick clarification. I was talking really fast, so I might have misspoke, but I believe part of going along with Sophia's principle, she'd probably agree with this. We need to promote the guardian mentality in our patrol officers, the people you see day to day driving by. They're supposed to protect you from crime. They're not supposed to just be going out looking at everybody as a possible crime to be vanquished. And part of that is giving them options and making them more competent. So part of the reason I haven't had it, I've had one use of force in like 3 years, and it was actually just putting my hand on someone's shoulder to stop them from running from me. Is I do martial arts training. I am a counseling student. I go to diversity trainings. I'm in the military, so I have extra firearms training. So I'm comfortable using lower levels because I'm so trained that I don't have to resort to higher, more risky levels of dealing with stuff. If someone, I don't know the proper term for this, I worked in schools for too long, bucks up on me and tries to fight, I don't have to instantly push him off and try to fight the person. I feel competent enough that I can take a hit or two and deal with them. So I'll talk to him. And that's, I think a big part of it is making these officers more competent so they feel like they can react at lower levels.
Thank you so much, Dave, for your wonderful and insightful commentary on the question. So talking about the desensitization aspect, I think that you were wanting to know more about, and Dave, I'm sure can, being an officer, could speak from personal experience, and I've spoken with many officers as well, so I can kind of relay their sentiments in a confidential manner. It's very hard to engage in negative situations all day, and that becomes very burdensome for them. And this is what I don't blame them, because they're a person, they're a human being who is doing their job, and their job is to enforce law. And the point that I push back on is that law is enforced by punishment, and by punishment only or threat thereof. And this creates a fear that can increase, and it can increase tension and discord between both the person who's enforcing it and the community that has to live within it. I often think of bounded law like a house, and we live in this house, and the walls are the laws. And if we're afraid to touch the walls, or if we hear echoes of what's happened before, or even law that's been overturned because it's prejudicial or was racially motivated in the past, it still has those echoes of what's happened to people that have encountered it, and living in that house and in the resonance of that has a profound impact on us. And this carries on into the present moment, where we have these interactions with these preconceived notions of what's going to happen. And then it further divides the police from the community, who are afraid to engage with each other, because if they do, they know it's only going to be negative. So I'm trying to break this down with the possibility and the tools to engage with each other in a positive way to create a more symmetrical relationship, one that fosters trust and respect of each other and can build more peaceful communities and happier communities and officers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you guys.
And I would agree with you, Sophia. A lot of officers do get desensitized because everything goes on around them. One of the first lessons I was taught, and I try to remember, is when it stops affecting you, you need to stop. So I agree. Helping humanize will be a good effort.
All right, great. And then we also have a question in the chat for Sophia. Are you able to see that, Sophia? She actually looks frozen to me. So we'll see if she comes back. But in the meantime, do we have any other questions or comments?
I had one for Madison, if she's still here. I think she is. So do these churches also, because I know the Unitarian Church in Indianapolis, I think, does they use some of their funds from tithe and everything to help with legal fees for these nonviolent protesters that you've heard of?
So I am not familiar with Catholics for Choice using any of their funding for helping nonviolent resistors, but I do know that Faith Choice Ohio has a Jubilee Fund, and they use that to support individuals who are looking for more information or travel funds or any support they could have in childcare in receiving an abortion. And so because they cannot access it locally, they will get the support from the organization. But directly for anybody affected by nonviolent resistance pushback, no.
Thank you.
All right, and Sophia, I see you reconnected. So we do have a question in the chat directed towards you.
Yes, I see. Okay. I do see bounded law as punitive and unbounded law as a recognition of positive action, and it's not prescriptive. So one does not need to, the law itself is not pushing you in any direction. It's encouraging you to, and the communities, to define what is good for them and to grow in that direction. And do I see them as complementary? At this time, I see that there's a need for symmetry. How I think of it is like in a classroom, you have a teacher, and if you imagine that they're only correcting you all of the time, you will start to resent them. You will feel like they're disrespecting you, so why should you afford them any respect? And the classroom dynamic can break down. That's when you might have classmates and things start to make comments that might not be very respectful. They might push your boundaries. This is a breakdown of the peace in a particular authoritative space, because one only acknowledged the students when they didn't meet an expectation, when they got something wrong, when they somehow stepped out of line. And so I see it as complementary that as a teacher, you would need to both acknowledge a student when they succeed and maybe give them some gentle correction, and that seeing them as good ultimately and worthy of being there and learning will encourage them and create a more prosperous space. I'm not sure we could ever be one day in an unbounded law only society. It sounds terrific and wonderful. Maybe someday, but right now I think having that symmetry would be greatly helpful. Does that help, Mr. Wilson? You have your mute on, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, certainly. That very informative. Thank you. Yes. So you're giving me a presentation of something that is complementary, but not prescriptive. So,
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And it looks like we had a question from Dr. Gerstein.
Yeah, thanks to everybody for your very provocative kind of talk, especially at the end of the day, to hear your points of view on how to change some things that have been ingrained in our society for a really long time. Madison, I didn't hear your talk. I lost my signal there for a while, but for the other folks that presented, I'm curious if you take your populations out of the equation. So if you take the law enforcement and mental health professionals out of the equation, what are the norms and values in our society that contribute to the inability to accomplish the aspirational solutions that you presented? I hope that's clear. So for instance, Sophia, you want to move towards the UnBounded Law. What are the norms and values in our society from keeping us from getting there? And David G., you talked about mental health counselors and counselors embracing the precepts. What are those values and norms that keep us from getting there?
I think I see what you're saying. So removing all my population stuff. I think the main obstacle in getting in the way of a more guardian mentality or a more unbounded law is the conflation in society between justice and revenge. So if someone keys your car, people want something to be done instantly or something like that. Or if someone punches you in a bar, punching back, they can confuse that revenge with justice. I think that's a big part. Like a lot of young officers, if they get someone challenges their authority, they seek revenge by finding something else to arrest them for, like talking yourself into a ticket, versus the justice of realizing they're not mad at you as Jacob Smith, they're mad at the officer. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that might be one of the boundaries, Dr. Gerstein.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting answer. What I was curious about is if you take the mental health professionals out of the equation, what pushes them not to say, and you take the police out of the equation, what pushes the police not to be guardians, not themselves, but other things happening in our society? My assumption is that it's a systemic problem, right? And the law enforcement and the mental health professionals are just playing out activities, behaviors that our society values.
That's pretty much what I was going to say was in terms of the macro level dynamics, societal dynamics. I mean, the individualistic mentality of Americans, coupled with capitalistic thinking, is probably the root of a lot of the problems that folks would experience, regardless of whether they're mental health professionals or in a different field that had the same ability to kind of coerce and take advantage of. I mean, it's a human problem, is what it really is. But I do think our society doubles down on some of the ways that, for instance, people feel compelled to make money at an exorbitant rate in order to kind of keep up with other people or keep up with what society expectations are for certain stratas of the economic sphere. And then, of course, anytime there's an imbalance in any type of relationship, and I think the same thing could be applicable to police work. I used to be a police officer as well and an Army soldier. So Dave and I have a lot in common there. But so anytime there's an imbalance, I think it's human nature for people who have more of the power to kind of lean into it when they don't have a lot of underlying values that are holding them back from doing that. So some folks have it and some folks seem not to. But in terms of kind of the bigger dynamics, all I can think of really are the things that Americans really value over other things, which is individualism and capitalism. You know, in an Asian society, for instance, you'd have a lot more communal thinking about it. And so you'd probably have some different outcomes, maybe, depending on where you were.
So I think your question was, what values do we need in order to move forward in a more peaceful and prosperous way? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's the flip side of it. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I think with our law, we often target and focus on what is wrong, what we shouldn't do. And I think a lot about our healthcare, that oftentimes we think about the symptoms and we identify what's wrong with us. If we feel sad, perhaps we have a condition. And so a lot of our way that we live is in bounded concepts of what, if these things happen, this is what's wrong, and these are the negative consequences, which leads us to a lot of fear and actually can create the effect that we don't wish to have happen to us. And law, in addition, is, I believe, perpetuating harm by punishing harmful behavior with harm. So you steal something and then you end up going to prison. You potentially have to pay fines. And although we do take into consideration the circumstances under which this happened, they're often looked at in a negative way, such as you had trauma, which led you to have this particular condition, which then led you to not have a job, which led you, and you think about all the negative series of events that happened that led to the harm that is now leading you to another harm and becomes cyclical. When I think of harm and wrongdoing in terms of virtue, and that often many people end up in difficult situations because they can't reconcile or achieve all virtues in a given situation. Think about a mother who has a child who is diabetic and needs insulin. They can't afford it. She's now needs insulin at this very moment. Her sugar is going way too high, and Walgreens is closed. And so she breaks into Walgreens and steals insulin, saves her child's life. In that time, she's trying to uphold all virtues, but can't. Do I be an upstanding citizen and never steal, or do I let my daughter die? What do? I love my daughter, or I love my country. How can I uphold all loves in a certain situation? And that most people are always striving for love, striving for virtue, but get placed in these disjunctive virtue scenarios where harm occurs because they can't uphold both at the same time. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how to create law and policy that helps people avoid the disjunctive virtue scenario so they can uphold all the virtues that they hold dear to them and that we wish to uphold as Americans, or in any country, we uphold certain virtues. And this is the way that we move forward, by ensuring everyone can achieve the good in their life and not to abstain from the bad.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so we are pretty much at the end of our session. I want to thank everybody for their wonderful presentations and also this really great discussion and questions and answering. I hope to see some of you guys at our next Zoom session. We have a dance performance coming up, a short break, and then our keynote speaker. So there's a lot of really great stuff coming up. Thank you, everybody, again, and hope you have a great rest of your day.